Book 4, Falcon in the Barn, Chapter 23. The most harmful sentences begin with, I deserve. Shem and 1/4 of the army rode their fastest to the blazing fire. It was the first, but likely not the last. Already he had passed several villagers with torches running to another abandoned house, and had dispatched one of his sergeants and 10 men to monitor the situation. Behind him were 3 more sergeants with their 10s, and they joined Captain Thorne with his 20, already calling for fire wagons. Disregard that order, Sergeant Major Zenas yelled. Thorne, on his feet with his sword drawn, spun to face him. What? Zenas, that barn will burn to the ground. Let it, Shem said, dismounting and drawing his weapon. It's a hay fire, and impossible to extinguish. Besides, you heard Colonel Shin's orders. Defend only the innocent. Stay out of the fights. Thorne gestured furiously to the fire behind him. Even if the fights start a fire? Especially. If you see livestock in danger or people who need help getting out of the way, then by all means help. Otherwise, we stay out of it. I don't think so, Sergeant, Thorne announced and turned on his heel. Until Zenas shouted, Thorne, about face. Habit made Thorne spin around, and when he realized he'd automatically obeyed the sergeant major, he glowered. Zenas pointed with his sword. Thorne, you will do exactly as Colonel Shin has commanded, and you will notice that we have swords drawn. Thorne, what does that dictate about the situation? Thorne swallowed as if gagging on something nasty, and glanced around at the enlisted men who watched the officer closely. Means battle situation. Battle situation, Zenas repeated, and tilted his head waiting for Thorne to finish properly. Thorne's jaw shifted. Battle situation, sir. That's right, Zenas said, smiling inwardly at how much pain Lemuel's eyes registered, as protocol required that he direct that sir to Shem. Since I'm on the field in a battle situation, and I've been serving longer than any man besides Colonel Shin, I am in command, here and now, and I will enforce every order of Colonel Shin. Is that clear, soldier? Thorne's knuckles turned white as he gripped his hilt, but no matter how enraged he was, there was no other response than, Yes, sir. There were far too many witnesses. Zenas nodded once. To a sergeant of one group of 10, he said, Head to the southwest section. There are at least 2 houses empty there. Protect the innocent. Stay out of the fighting. Yes, sir. The sergeant grinned broadly and took off with his soldiers in pursuit, but not without first sending the captain a filthy look. Zenas pretended not to notice as he gave directions to the other sergeants and their 10s, and finally turned to a steaming Thorne. Keep your 20 in the area, Captain, Zenas used his most commanding tone. This is a central location, and you can send out soldiers in 2s and 4s as needed. Protect the innocent. We know, Thorne seethed. Shem arched an admonishing eyebrow at the captain. He folded his arms, a rather difficult thing to do while holding one's sword, but Shem wasn't going to sheath it for anything. Not so much that he needed it to defend himself, but because he didn't want there to be any question that this was not a battle situation. In fact, Shem had practiced holding his sword and folding his arms for just such an occasion. Yes, he knew he had odd hobbies. Thorne, I'm so glad that you know. Now, I will be surveying the village and reassigning soldiers as needed. Shin's agreed to send 100 to help. Why not the entire army? Thorne demanded. We could get into a whole lot of trouble we don't want, Thorne, Shem countered, with additional layers of meaning on top. Now, as I was saying, he did his best to leer at the insubordinate captain, while ignoring the encouraging grins of his fellow enlisted men behind the hated officer. I will reassign soldiers as needed, so make sure you're aware of where yours are at all times, should I need a few. Grumbling under his breath, Thorn turned to leave, but Shem grabbed his arm and snapped him back. To Thorn's affronted expression, Shem said, "I didn't hear your response, soldier." Behind Thorn, a few enlisted men punched the air in fiendish pleasure, because they knew what Thorn would have to say next. Captain Thorn squinted, livid, before saying, "Yes, sir." Zenas gave him his most generous smile, as if releasing a schoolboy who'd finally learned his lesson. "Off you go then, Thorn." As Shem sheathed his weapon, only for the moment while he mounted his horse again, Thorn murmured, "Slagging Zenas," as he stormed off without any semblance of a salute. The sound of 20 enlisted men sucking their breath through their teeth slowed down his stalking momentarily. But Zenas only called, "I heard that, and I'll remember it, Thorn. I'll remember." Accompanied by 2 privates, Shem rode off to the east, where he knew a large home would be the site of contention. He wasn't surprised but disappointed when he found a raging argument between 2 families. Obediently, the 6 soldiers there guarded a house nearby, sheltering residents from Moreland while they watched the feud. Shem reined his horse to a stop, several paces away from the screaming neighbors, and they all turned to him first with annoyance and then with hope for allegiance. "Sergeant Zenas, explain to these imbeciles how we're the closest neighbor. I walked out this distance myself," one man insisted. His neighbor scoffed. "Oh, yeah? What's his first name?" Shem drew his sword, the antidote to all arguments. The edgers stared anxiously at him. "Nope," he said simply. "I'm not going to argue for either of you. But I will tell you to let that little girl get out and stand over there by my soldiers so she's safe from whatever stupid thing you're all about to do next." The mother harumphed, but the girl, about 11 years old, gratefully skidded away to the soldiers posted at the other house. "Thank you. Not like I want to take care of even more sheep." Shem smiled sadly and was about to say something more to the adults shouting again about who should claim the former shepherd home when a movement behind it caught his eye. He nodded to the privates to remain there, and he wheeled his horse around and kicked it to a trot around the sheepfold, where several dozen animals bleated at him. The movement, he noticed, wasn't wild dogs, but something even more menacing. Thieves of the 2-legged kind. He wasn't surprised, but again disappointed. While 2 families bickered in the front, another family was raiding the house from behind. Shem saw a boy of about 7 come running out of the back of the house, grinning and cradling an iron pot containing several silver utensils. His younger brother burst out as well, triumphantly displaying a... Shem blinked to make sure he saw it correctly in the dim light. Yes, it was an old chicken carcass, likely the dead owner's last meal some weeks ago. Still, his parents cheered his efforts until they noticed the sergeant major glaring at them. The father stood tall and defiant. "No one wants these, Zenas." Shem scoffed at that. "Not the carcass, no. But someone would want the other boys' haul, and you've taught them to steal." "We've taught our sons how to get what we deserve," the father countered. "Yes," Shem said steadily. "I can think of all kinds of things you deserve right now, but instead I'll advise you to get those boys inside where it's safe, and in your own house." The man smiled slyly at him. "I don't want this house. I've got everything I need." He took the carcass from the little boy and tossed it over to the milk cart. But he wasn't hauling milk and cheese tonight. It was loaded with all kinds of shiny baubles, proudly topped with the chicken skeleton. Shem gritted his teeth and stared hard at the young father. Years ago, they had suspected him as one of the first to go raiding for the garters. While they caught Pohili with embarrassing frequency, Shem could never catch up to his older partner in crime, who now patted his mule to pull the overloaded cart. His wife slipped her hand into his and sent a challenging look to the sergeant major. Shem clenched the reins in his hands. The next generation of bandits had been born that night, tutored by their parents. "We were at the amphitheater tonight, Zenas," the thief-turned-milkman turned back to thief told him. "There's nothing you can do to us, and you know it." Shem bit back his frustration as he watched the young family slink away into the night. Years ago, he'd drawn conclusions that he now realized he needed to revisit. He charitably thought, when they were first started nabbing teenagers, that the boys were simply bored and looking for an adventure. It wasn't as if they were bad boys, just boys. That's why the Garters had so much success with them. But maybe that wasn't it at all. Shem knew, better than most, that people had different sides. Usually only one or two are presented to the public, and friends assume they see the truth. Yet in the corners of each soul resided facets that most people kept under control. Tendencies toward violence, or abuse, or deceit, or selfishness, or lust, shoved down deep to keep them from surfacing. But now Shem considered that some people kept those facets down only until the right situation presented itself. Maybe people truly were more bad than good, waiting for the opportune time to give in to their urges. And now they were teaching their children how to lead double lives as well. Shem wheeled his horse around abruptly, because he knew he was the worst example of them all. Later that night, a sullen Colonel Shin sat in the forward office and stared out the wide windows. On top of the desk was a stack of notes being added to every few minutes by soldiers, such as Lieutenant John Offra, currently bounding up the tower stairs. "What now, Offra?" Perrin asked as patiently as he could. "Captain Thorne again, sir," said Offra apologetically. "He's requesting once again that you send more soldiers." "And I'm saying once again, no. Has Zenas requested more?" "No, sir," Offra smiled. "The commander in the field of battle has not seen the need for more guards for the innocent. He claims that everything we can control is under control." Perrin smirked back. "Then I second Zenas's judgment. Tell Thorne that. Also tell him that he can inform Barney and Wibble and every other fool out there that we didn't make this problem, nor will we resolve it. And be careful, Lieutenant," Perrin added. "You're the best training partner I've had, and the strongest soldier race is just a few weeks away." "And you're ready for it, sir." Offra headed down the stairs, passing the sergeant who came up, waving a note. "Colonel, another house." He handed the note to the corporal, recording them at the other end of the desk. Perrin stood up for a better view of the expanse of black, punctured by orange glows. "Over there, right?" He gestured to a section in the southwest. "Where exactly is it?" "On the 12th Road, number 562. Perrin growled. "One that we helped rebuild, right?" The sergeant growled back. "I made the doors myself, sir." "And what are those doors doing right now, Sergeant?" "Burning, sir." Perrin rubbed his forehead. "Stupid. That makes what now, Corporal?" Although he could count the fires, some had already extinguished themselves. The corporal looked down at the master list. 13, sir. 13 houses on fire, 7 barns burning, 4 shops. Wait, that's 6. Enough. Thank you." He turned back to the sergeant. "They're just letting it burn?" "That's what Zenas suggested. It was abandoned anyway." Perrin nodded. "Good. Remind everyone to keep their distance." "Thank you, Colonel." "Appreciated, sir." The sergeant saluted before heading back down the stairs in a quick jog. Perrin turned back to the window to count the fires. Every tower, their own signal fires burning, and the long orange banners hoisted at the tops were calling for help. The soldiers manning them had been blowing their horns, the foreshort pattern requesting assistance, until Perrin sent word for them to shove the horns in the corner for the night. Some people were trying to sleep. He'd sent help, along with Sergeant Major Zenas, whom he thought would be more objective and compassionate. Perrin didn't believe there were more than a dozen innocents in Edge tonight, and as raw and rough as his nerves were, he'd likely start a few fires himself just by snapping his fingers. Shem was a far calmer, wiser man to put in charge. And the moment Captain Thorne declared it to be a battle situation, likely hoping to earn yet another shiny medal from his grandfather for leadership, Perrin knew that even the darkest situations had golden linings. Thorne had inadvertently put Shem in command over him. That was the only thing that put a dim smile on Perrin's face that night, while Edge kicked and screamed and grabbed, trying to establish just who was the closest friend or neighbor. Mari had left a short time ago, accompanied by 4 soldiers. She'd been listening to the reports coming in and watching the turmoil from the windows. Her words still echoed in his mind. I've lived here my entire life, but tonight, for the first time in 45 years, I'm ashamed to say I'm edgy. She was reading a note about 2 men who had fought over a horse. Both had pulled out their knives and clumsily lunged at each other. A third neighbor, watching their attempts, made off with the horse when the 2 men stumbled and plunged their knives into various body parts. While they were sloppy, they were also effective. One had already died from a punctured lung, and his former friend was bleeding so profusely from his neck that the doctor didn't think he would make it to morning. Perrin, who are these people? None of them match the memories I have of them. Perrin agreed. At first he was ashamed of them, then embarrassed for the village he had claimed as his own. But now he was furious. They were destroying houses they helped build together and stealing goods that none of them needed. Shem had come up a while ago to bring a report while Mari was there, and he told them that he watched 2 older women fighting over the most hideous hat in the world. The news he delivered after that, though, left Perrin nearly speechless. There's a new problem, Colonel. It seems that many Edgers realize that their neighbors didn't die, so they don't have a claim over anyone's property. Therefore, they've taken up to looting houses anyway. It's mostly in the south, but I'm sure within the hour someone in the north will get the same bright idea. They're, yep, just taking what they want from the houses of the living. Hey, they want it, they're entitled to it. That's when Perrin insisted Mari go home with additional reinforcements. While Deckett may have not felt his house was worth protecting, there were a few things in Perrin's that he didn't want touched. He now looked out the window in the direction of their home, then at the Brighter farm. There was a fire just 1 road away, and he prayed silently again that none would come any closer. Several hours later, well past midnight, the reports finally slowed, then stopped. Perrin posted himself at the compound's gates to greet his soldiers as they trudged back in for what remained of the night. Good work, men. Thank you. Well done. Get to bed now, Perrin said as they plodded past him, and he patted a few on the back. Shower first if you want. You all deserve to sleep in a bit in the morning, don't you think? Wake-up call will be postponed by 1 hour, maybe even 2. That elicited a few exhausted cheers. At the very end of the soldiers was Sergeant Major Zenas, who assured a sooty Captain Thorne that he could make the final report to the colonel. Absolutely, Captain, Perrin said with as much finality as he could generate. But Thorne didn't take the hint. Sir, he said, I could have contained a few of those situations. I must protest that I was not given sufficient power to... No, Thorne, Perrin sighed. No amount of power would have brought any of this to a safe and lasting resolution. Indeed, a show of force on our part would have increased the violence. I believe you're wrong, sir, he said, with more gumption than he'd shown in several moons. But before he could explain why, Perrin folded his arms. Thorne, no one out there would have listened to a word you said. They already made up their minds. But we could have made wiser decisions. We could have been fair. There was nothing fair about any of this, Thorne. Perrin exploded, too tired to pretend that the inanity of the night hadn't gotten to him. I presented a fair proposal. They rejected it. Well, it was a majority rule, Colonel. Thorne started with the sticky insinuation that if the majority of villagers wanted something, it was automatically right. Perrin never fell for that bullying tactic. Mob rule, you mean? Well then, if you didn't approve it, sir, you could have overturned it. Thorne threw his hands in the air. That's the power you have as commander. Total control. It was an uncontrollable situation, Captain. Perrin gestured wildly back, regretting later that he didn't smack the captain accidentally. When the majority of people choose foolishly, then it's best to take a step back so as to not get dragged down with them. No, that's not our job, Thorne insisted. You and I have higher sensibilities, enlightened minds, and we're required to force the people to a better resolution. It must have been Perrin's slacked jaw and astonished expression that caused Captain Thorne to stumble in his speech. Perrin put his hands on his waist. Force the people to a resolution you think acceptable, no doubt? Thorne, do you have any idea what happens then? You truly get lasting peace. You truly get lasting rebellion, Captain. Respectfully, sir, I disagree. And Thorne marched off into the compound. Next to Perrin, Shem let out a low whistle. I hope I'm long gone if he ever makes it to general, he murmured, as they watched the captain elbow his way through enlisted men to get to the showers. I'm never sure which captain's going to show up each day, Perrin murmured back. The adulator or the underminer. He must get dizzy with how often he vacillates between the two. Did he actually claim that he has higher sensibilities? Yes, Perrin sighed in worry, and an enlightened mind. He said the same about me. However, and a corner of his mouth went up into the smallest of smiles, I noticed that he ignored you completely in that assessment. Did you annoy him at all this evening? Me? Of course not. I was my usual charming self, Shem sniffed. Even when I reminded him in front of 20 enlisted men that I was the acting commander, I was entirely pleasant. Perrin snorted, grateful it was dark enough that the last soldiers in the compound couldn't see his grin. Come on, Zenas, we have reports to finish. A few minutes later, they slumped into chairs in Perrin's office, since reports to finish was code for find a better place to talk. What a senseless night, Shem said, putting a boot casually on the command desk. After 8 hours, it appears the village has finally given up. Chief Barney's worried about the morning, though, but I can't imagine there's anything left unclaimed. He shook his head. Perrin, this was one of the strangest nights I've ever experienced. I didn't even know who the enemy was most of the time. We are our own enemies, Perrin sighed back, and started to straighten the stack of reports on his desk. He gave up and dropped them in frustration. Shem, I feel like I didn't even know these people anymore. What happened to them? Shem pondered that. I've been asking myself the same question. People I've seen laughing and working together for years were shouting and threatening each other with pitchforks and broomsticks over a bridle. But I've come to a conclusion. They can endure Garter attacks, land tremors, destruction, imminent starvation, illness, and even the death of loved ones, but they can't handle prosperity. Perhaps, Perrin, wealth is the greatest trial of them all. Perrin nodded. Tonight, I decided the most harmful sentences begin with, I deserve. The other day, I was reading the writings and came across a passage that describes the last day. You know the part where it talks about the destroyer taking out those who come against the people of the Creator? I do. Well, I sat thinking about that, wondering what that destroyer would be. Shem smiled slightly. Yes, you would. Perrin ignored that. Would it be an animal, or a person, or maybe even an illness like the pox? But today I had another thought. Maybe it's all of us. Maybe the true destroyer will be jealousy, because we kill each other over little things we think we deserve, destroying ourselves. Interesting theory, Shem said. So how do we avoid being among the jealous ones who destroy each other? Perrin exhaled. That's the other thing I've been wondering about. How do I not get sucked into the same attitude? Shem didn't answer him, but smiled, almost knowingly. They sat in silence for a few moments until Perrin broke it with, "Did you ever read Terep's stories when you were a boy?" Shem frowned briefly, wondering why the sudden change in topic. "Yes, I think my father still has my copy in his attic." "Ever wonder what a wapiti looks like? For real?" Shem smiled, bemused. "For real?" "They're real, Shem. They have to be," Perrin whispered longingly. "Why would someone take all that time to carve them at the ruins if they weren't real?" Shem shrugged. "I don't know, but I highly doubt people rode them. Those long antlers would knock them off. I think Terep made up that part for the story. And whoever tried to ride a large deer around here?" "For steering," Perrin said, staring off into a corner, but seeing much further away. He had an odd, faint smile on his face as he held up his hands and guided something unseen. "Figured it out when I was young. The antlers were for steering the wapiti." Shem sat back, realizing that tonight Perrin wanted to be as far away from Edge as possible. Terep's western ruins was about as far as he could get. "Did I ever tell you they named neighborhoods in Idemia after those animals?" Perrin said, still with an airy tone. "Wapiti Way. As if anyone would ever recognize what a wapiti was in their way. And Elephant Elms, although those elms would never get as big as an elephant." "Those you could ride, I bet," Shem said, "if they were real, which you also seem to believe." Perrin nodded slowly. "And zebra estates, with a Z in estates," he scoffed lightly. "Such magnificent animals zebras must be, yet only to have 2 big houses named after them, and with bad spelling to boot." "You sound like you believe they're alive and out there somewhere, Perrin." "They are," Perrin breathed. "They have to be. Zebras." He finally met Shem's eyes in the glow of a single candle. "I've never told anyone this before, but I was looking for zebras." Shem blinked. "Recently?" "No, when I first came to Edge and went into the forests. This may sound silly, but I thought, what better animal for the garters to ride than a striped horse? It would blend in perfectly with the shadows." "Did you see any?" Perrin shook his head. "Knew I probably wouldn't." He gazed out the dark window. "Just hoping, that all of the stories might be real, just some evidence." "What color stripes should zebras have?" "Black and white," Perrin declared. "Mari thinks brown, but she has no appreciation of horses." He chuckled sadly. "Black and white, Shem, out there, somewhere. There has to be more than just this, isn't there?" Again Shem smiled, almost knowingly. "Likely very far away, but of course, Perrin," he said in the tones of a man telling his dying best friend that, sure, he'd retrieve for him one of the moons. "Of course there is." Mari sat at the eating table with 6 candles in front of her because on a night like tonight she hungered for light as she waited for Perrin to come home. Jatsi and Pato had gone to sleep some time ago, but Mari was recalling the words of guide Hiram, recorded before he was attacked and killed by the founders of Idemia. Tonight, his reminder of how they spent their first 6 years of existence on that world was even more poignant and timely. "I warn you that we cannot continue in the ways we are now. Our lives and existence on this world are not forever. An end will come. In the arguing among our people, I see the seeds of antipathy and apathy that will grow to destroy the world we're striving so hard to create. We're drifting from the structure the Creator left us. And if we continue on this path, our descendants will not be found faithful at the last day when the test ends. What we do today affects our children and their children. For their sakes, we can't continue down this way you're planning. I know your secrets, and they will destroy us all. I beg you to abandon this. You know as well as I do that the last day will find each of us either facing the reward of paradise to enjoy the company of our family and friends for the next 1,000 years and beyond, or the misery of the dark deserts to endure the torture of knowing that we fail to do His will. When that day comes, no one knows but our Creator, and its arrival will surprise those that fight against the Creator's people. On that day, do not be one of those surprised to find yourselves on the wrong side. On that day, do not find yourself with a blade in hand, ready to charge your brother or sister. On that day, be one of the many standing with the guide, having seen the signs and recognizing what is coming. Before the last day will be a land tremor, more powerful than any ever experienced. It will awaken the largest mountain and change all that we know in the world. Those changes will bring famine, death, and desperation to the world. And that desperation will cause the world's army to seek to destroy the faithful of the Creator. Be among those faithful to the Creator. Be among those standing firm for what you know, having not so quickly forgotten His words to us. Be among those who see the marvelous deliverance from the enemy the Creator will send, for He will send His deliverance before He sends destruction to those who fight Him. Don't destroy His structure for our survival. What you're planning to do will ruin. And there it ended, His words and His life, as He tried to tell them they had to live as one big family, or they'd destroy each other, just as they were tonight. We've forgotten, Mari whispered miserably. The world is just too loud, and the writing's too still and quiet. The world forces its way. The Creator never forces His will. She rested her chin on her hands in defeat. You saw how they responded to Perrin's suggestion of giving the surplus to those in need, Mari said to the dark. Suddenly everyone became needy. Are we ever satisfied? She reread the words of the next guide, Cluus. The entire world was given to us freely from the Creator. He doesn't want us to hoard and sell His gifts. He wants us to share all things freely with whomever has a need. There will always be enough, and even more to spare. No one should be in want. This compulsion to take and then force others to hand over shiny bits of metal, that's the power of the refuser. His method of putting all of us in bondage to each other. Can't you see? It was truly ludicrous. No one will be lastingly happy with yet another plow or an additional bale of hay, especially if it cost a friendship or a life. Why do friends come to blows over an ugly hat? She felt the cosmos shrug along with her. Is there anyone in the world that's sane? She whispered. Shem, certainly, and Rector Young. But anyone else in the world who realizes that we've been doing it all wrong? There were times the cosmos seemed to wink at her with the notion that there was nothing else for her to know, at least not yet. Mari looked out the dark window. They're just like animals, she decided. No, worse than animals. We may no longer debate, but we've retained our ability to rationalize away logic and compassion. We can be so great or be so terrible. It seems we're content to just be terrible. A few nights later, Perrin was up again past midnight, but not because of another bad dream. This time it was because of a good one of his own making. The idea had been growing in him for over a year now, but since Edge's temper tantrum 3 days ago, when more than 40 properties changed hands, 24 more were burned to the ground, 5 people died, and Edge had divided itself into too many factions of former friends and neighbors who now hated each other that he lost count, he was nearly jumping out of his skin at the thought of what he could do next. An hour each night for a few weeks ought to do it. So once he was sure Maury was dozing deeply, she didn't think she snored, and he'd never tell her that she did, because it was always a reliable signal for him, he slipped out of bed and crept down the stairs. He made his way to the study and shut the door noiselessly. Before he lit a candle, he made sure the curtains were closed completely. He didn't want any light leaking out, or any worried soldier or nosy neighbor peeking in. Once he lit the candle, he dimly illuminated his shelf of books and ignored awards. Nearly vibrating with excitement, he carefully pulled from the top shelf a roll of parchments. He set them on his desk and grinned. And that's the end of the chapter. Thank you.